Hello everyone and welcome to today's webinar, Get Your Payroll Done for Sage 50 Payroll. My name's Duncan, I'll be your host and presenter today, and I am joined by my colleague James, who's standing by in the background, ready to answer any questions. Let's now take a look at what we're going to cover in the webinar. So we've split the presentation into three parts. We're going to start with preparing to process a payroll, running through a checklist of tasks you may need to complete before you actually sit down to enter the wages. We're then going to move on and process your payroll. So we're going to get that payroll done, running through 5 key tasks and also explaining some of the other tasks that fit in and around the process. And we're going to finish with the month-end tasks. So some things that you'll need to do at the end of a tax month, usually involved in paying your tax and national insurance over to HMRC. We'll take questions throughout and keep an eye on that Q&A panel for the questions and answers, and we will stick around at the end for a little while just to give you that final opportunity as well. So let's get started with preparing to process, and I'm going to take you through a 4-step checklist of tasks to complete before you sit down to enter the payments. So those 4 tasks are to add any new starters that have joined the business since the last payroll that you ran, to enter absences that will qualify for a statutory payment, such as maternity, paternity, or sickness, to put employees who are not being paid on hold, so that's these casual employees or those that are on unpaid leave currently, and to check your mailbox if you receive notifications online for any new tax code or student loan notices. So I'm going to run through a demo to show you some of these steps in action. So if I just bring the checklist down, you'll see that I'm already logged into Sage Payroll. Now today I'll be processing a monthly payroll and my employees are paid on the last day of the month. And the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to add a new starter to my payroll. So someone that has joined the company since the last time I ran it. Now, whenever you take on a new starter, they should have with them either their P45 from their previous employer, or if they don't have a P45, you'll need to get them to fill in HMRC's starter checklist. Now, in case you don't know where to find that, there is a link in the handout, but I'll just show you it on screen. So I've got this open in my browser. So the starter checklist for PAYE will help you determine which tax code to use if there's no P45. And it's also useful even if you do have a P45, because it allows you to capture all the information you'll need for a new starter, including details of any student loan that they might be repaying. Now, employees can fill this in online and send you the details as an attachment or by email, or perhaps a bit simpler is to get the PDF of the printed form. So the starter checklist for employees just here. And that then gives your employee everything that they need to provide for you to set them up on your payroll. So for example, you've got all the personal details, national insurance number, date of birth. You've then got the employee statement. So it gives them guidance on which statement they would choose based on their circumstances. And then information about student and postgraduate loans, including which plan type they might be on if they're repaying one of these. So really useful form, as I say, even if you've got a P45, you might want to get them to fill this in anyway, and then you should have everything that you need to set them up in your payroll. And if you don't have a P45, you would simply use the information on this form to set them up. So returning to the program, I'm now going to create a new employee record. And the first tip of the day is if you are replacing an employee, or you have an existing employee that's going to do a very similar role to the new employee that you're taking on, you can actually use an existing employee record as a template and copy over some of the common settings. And this just helps you keep your employee records consistent with the same types of pay element, department, etc. Now, in this example, we have an employee that will be leaving us this month, and we've taken on a new employee to take over their role. So what I'm going to do when I set up the new employee is select the existing employee first. And if I then come to the employee tasks, and you can either use the employee wizard to enter information step by step, or the quick employee option to enter information in one screen. But as long as you have someone highlighted, you'll see a prompt similar to this, asking if you want to base that new employee on an existing record and copy over information. So if I click yes to that prompt, it's going to pre-fill some of this information for me, and I just then need to go through filling in the mandatory information and everything else that's required to set up the record. So it's mandatory if it has a star next to it. So I'm going to start by entering the employee name. You should provide at least 2 address lines and the employee's postcode. You can put some contact details in and an email address. And if you use our online services for Payslips and P60s, it's the email address that the employee would use to log in. So I'm just going to fill in a date of birth, selecting that I've done my right to work checks. We're going to specify the start date for this employee. So they started on the 8th of May. We can fill in bank account details if we want to, and that can be used for Sage e-banking or Sage supplier and salary payments. And then over here on the right-hand side, we would then fill in the starter form details. So most employees should have a P45 from their previous employer. So you would choose that P45 option and you would fill in the relevant details, such as the leaving date and the pay and tax. Now be careful around this time of year with the P45, as if it relates to a previous tax year, you should not enter the pay and tax details from that P45. And you might be best just sticking with the starter checklist in that scenario. Or if you don't have a P45, just choose the option underneath, P46, and then you can choose the declaration that the employee chose from that starter checklist. So in my example, we don't have the P45, they selected statement B, and that's put them on the emergency tax code on a week 1, month 1 basis. We can then complete the additional information, so national insurance number and the NI category. This is usually standard rate contributions. We can indicate if student or postgraduate loan deductions are continuing, and then we can fill in things such as the department and enter a job title. Now, when it comes to pension, most employees will need to be auto-enrolled into a pension scheme if they meet the criteria. But when you set them up, and if you're using our pensions module, this is particularly important. You should leave the pension detail as not set, and then you'll be doing a pension assessment, which will then determine if the employee needs to be put into the pension scheme, and if so, if you use our pensions module, it will then create enrolment information for your provider and letters to send out to the employee. Now, if you deal with your pension duties manually, so you don't have our pensions module, you could assign a pension scheme at this point if you know the employee will need to be auto-enrolled, or you could do a manual assessment when you first pay them and assign the pension scheme at that point. So we're going to leave it as no pension scheme for now. And we're just going to complete the process by entering the employee's salary in this case. So I put a yearly salary in, because they're getting a fixed amount per month. And you can see the overtime payment is already assigned because this has been based on that existing record. So I've now got enough information to save this new record. And if we were adding another employee and we wanted to keep that same template, we can retain some of the settings when we save this record. Or if you wanted to completely start from scratch again, if you had another employee, you can click Save and Clear. Now, I only have one new employee, so it doesn't matter which save option I choose. But we then get some reminders. We can enter bank details if required. And for this particular employee, because they have a factored pay element, we do also need to enter their contracted hours within the employee record. I'll come back to that a little bit later on. You'll see a factored payment when we process the pay run. So we now have the new employee added to the list, and we can then open the employee record and add any of the missing information. So in this case, I'm just going to pop into the salary details. I'm going to add in the employee's contracted hours per week. And by doing that, it means that their overtime rate can be calculated automatically because we have based it upon the employee's salary. So that's our new starter. I'm now going to move on to the next step, which is to enter any statutory absence details. So this could be sickness for an employee off sick, or maternity, paternity, or adoption leave. And there is a quick way to enter this information by first selecting the relevant employee, and then from the employee tasks, choose one of these options for recording sickness, adoption, maternity, or paternity, which will then give you a simple screen to fill in with all the details required to set up the statutory payment. Now, in this example, I'm going to record maternity, so I'm going to choose that option. I'm just going to tick the box to indicate I've received the medical evidence and confirm the expected date of birth of the child. Payroll will then do the necessary checks to make sure that the employee qualifies for the statutory payment, and all we then need to do is record the employee's last day of work. So they're finishing on the 12th of May, and then we'll see there's a set of key dates that have been calculated for us, and we can also see the employee's statutory pay entitlement. Now, we do have a separate session on processing maternity and paternity pay, so if you're interested in seeing that, we're running that webinar next month. But for now, I'm simply going to save these details. If I wanted to print them out, I could print a nice summary report from this option at the bottom. So we've got the absence entered. The next step in the checklist was to put employees who are not working on hold. So this applies specifically to those employees that may be casual or seasonal workers for periods where they haven't worked and therefore don't need to be paid. And by placing them on hold, it means that you prevent them from being included in a pay run where they haven't been paid. And it also gives you the opportunity to inform HMRC in your next submission that you have an employee who is irregularly paid, but they are still employed by you. So I'll just show you the on hold setting. So by going into this employee record, you'll find it on the employment tab. So we can then change the status from OK to on hold. And then by saving that change, it excludes this employee, and we can take them off hold the next time they work for us and need to be paid. And you can see as well, the current status for that employee is now displaying on hold. So one final task in our checklist, which is to check for any new tax code or student loan notices. Now, some of you will still get these in the post, in which case you would need to make any of the necessary changes manually within the employee record. But for those of you that are set up to receive notices online, you can actually retrieve them directly in Sage Payroll, and you'll be able to apply any changes to the relevant employee. Now, you do this by checking your secure mailbox, which you can find from the e-submissions tasks. You would then click onto IR Secure Mailbox, and then you would click on the button at the top to check for any new mail. So a good habit to get into. It'll then connect to your mailbox with HMRC, and it will download any of the notices you've received, and they'll be organized into folders where you can then view them and apply the necessary changes. Now, actually, in this example, I don't have any new notices, so I can simply close out of this screen, and I'm then completed my preparation, and I'm just about ready to start my payroll. So let's take a quick breather there and recap those preparation steps. And if you're downloading the handout, all of these links on the handout will take you to the relevant article if you want to read more about starters, absences, on hold, etc. So we added our new starter, and by selecting an existing record, we were able to copy some of the settings, saving us a bit of time. We then used the recording maternity option to enter maternity absence, and you can do similar for sickness, adoption, or paternity. If you have anyone not being paid, you can place them on hold. And then if you get your notifications online, check that secure mailbox. And then if required, you can apply any new tax code or student loan notices. And the link to that starter checklist for anyone that needs it is available there at the bottom of the slide. So that's the preparation done. And we're now ready to move on and get that payroll done. So this section is all around processing your payroll. Now, I am going to focus on 5 key tasks, but there are tasks that fit in and around this process that I'll mention and maybe give some quick demos on. But there's always links to further support from the links in your handout if you want to read more. Now, right at the start of the process, you will need to set your process date. That will be reported as the pay date in your submission and also determines the tax period for all calculations. You would then move on to enter the payments for the current period, and I'll show you a couple of different ways that you can do that. Once the payments are entered, you would produce payslips and reports. It could be online payslips, email payslips, or printed payslips and reports. And once you've checked those reports and you're happy with the values, you would update the records, which confirms or finalizes the payroll. And then that final step is submitting the information online to HMRC. So this is the process we're going to run through, and we're going to start with setting the process date. Now, under PAYE rules, the process date should be the date that the employees receive their pay. So not the date they worked up to, not the date you're sitting down to enter the wages, it's the date that they get the money, but with one notable exception, and that is when the regular pay date falls on a non-banking day, for example, a bank holiday or a weekend. You should still report that regular pay date in your submission to HMRC and use that date to calculate the payroll, and then actually pay your employee on the nearest banking day. And by doing this, just means that there's no negative effect on universal credit claims, which rely on the interval between payments being consistent. So we're going to go back into the demo to start off our payroll process. So if I just bring the slides down again, I'm going to go to the payroll tasks, and this is where we'll spend most of the time in this demo. And you can actually see tasks listed on the left-hand side. You'll be working your way from top to bottom. But if you are new to payroll, there is also a process map that you can follow, which would be quite useful. And you can switch to that at any time by clicking Change View in the top right corner and then selecting Payroll Process. Now you can resize this just to suit your own needs. So that'll do just there. And then you can start working through the tasks running from left all the way to right. Now, as you can see, there are more than just those 5 key tasks that I pointed out, but we're going to try and keep things as simple as possible today. And I will mention some of the additional tasks that fit in and around the process. So once you're on the payroll tasks, what you'll need to do is select the employees that you want to pay. Now, because all of my employees are paid monthly, a quick way to select them all is to clear any current selection by clicking Clear, and then to click Swap. We can see there we've got everyone highlighted. But if you have multiple pay frequencies, you can organize the employee list and filter by the different pay frequency. And if you click onto the outline option just here, you'll be able to sort of drill down and choose monthly or perhaps weekly, as I've got set up in this case. But in this demo, all of my employees are paid monthly, so I don't really need to use that outline feature. So we've got everyone selected, and now we're going to set our process date. So you are prompted to enter this when you first log into Sage 50 Payroll, but you can change it at any time from your payroll tasks or from the process map. And in this example, we're going to set ours to the 31st of May, as our pay date for these employees is the last day of the month. You can see it shows the tax period, which is month 2 in this case, and the tax year, and I would click OK to confirm that date. And the process date, tax period information is then displayed in the bottom right-hand corner of your program. Once the date has been set, you can then think about entering the employee's pay. Before you enter the payments, there is an option of resetting payment values. They can be set back to default values, they can be cleared entirely, or they can be retained based on the last pay run. So if you do have a bit of a variable payroll, maybe the hours vary, some of the payment rates might vary, such as bonuses, you might consider running the Reset Payments wizard, which you can find here in the process map as well. And that will allow you to selectively reset your payments, for example, to clear any overtime hours and maybe clear the bonus rates. So you can work through this wizard, working through payments and deductions and any manual statutory payments. And when you complete the wizard, it'll then make the changes globally to everyone selected. So it might be useful for those of you that run a variable payroll. Now, I'm not going to bother with this because mine is more of a static payroll. And the default position is it will retain the values that were processed in the previous period. And I'm just going to go straight into the Enter Payment screen where we can start to look at the payment information. So here it is in the process map. You also find it in the employee tasks. Because I've selected an employee marked on hold, I am being prompted to deselect that employee. So I'm just going to go ahead and click yes. And that's then going to take us in to the payment information for the first employee within that selection. So pay elements are organized into the tabs. So payments, deductions, attachments, and loans. There's a section where you can update sickness or parental leave absence. There's a summary of payments and deductions, information involved in calculations, and notes. So we'll just take a look at some of these screens. We've got a fixed salary for this employee. We've got an overtime, which is a factored payment. So it's calculating this rate at time and a half based on the salary. So I would simply enter the hours of overtime worked. And then for the bonus payment, I'm going to enter that as 1 at £250, as that's the bonus I want to pay this month. And then you can look through at deductions, attachments, and loans. Sick pay and parental leave can be recorded here. There's a summary of payments and deductions. And this is where you'll find information such as pension contributions, student and postgraduate loans, all the facts and figures involved in the calculations. And you can even enter your notes, which will be recorded in the employee history. So the idea is you enter the payments. When you're happy with them, you click Save/Next. That just moves you on to the next employee where you repeat that same process. Now with employee 3, you might remember we selected them when we took on the new starter. And the reason for that is this employee will be leaving this month. And when you're dealing with any starter or leaver, you'll need to consider whether you need to make an adjustment to their usual monthly or weekly salary. So at the moment, we've got the monthly salary entered. But what we need to do for this employee is we need to pay them for the days they've worked up to their leaving date. So I'm going to do an adjustment to the number value in order to prorate their salary. And the way that I'm going to do it is I'm just going to divide the number of working days that they worked by the number of working days in the month. And you can actually bring up a little calculator if you want some help with this by clicking on the calculator icon. And I know that this employee worked 15 days up to their leaving date and would have been paid for 23 days had they worked the full month. So that's just one method of working out a part period salary. You'll have your own method, so do stick to your company's process for this matter, but you can see that the amount has now been reduced accordingly. Now, when it comes to leavers, have a think about other payments that might be due, because really you want to include all of their pay when you pay them for the last time, as processing a payment after leaving involves a few extra steps. So have a think about overtime payments that might be due, any outstanding bonuses or commissions. And there's a little checkbox you can select at the bottom of the screen, which will run some checks in the background and will notify you of any potentially outstanding items. So I'm just going to tick this box to say the employee is leaving, and it has detected that the employee has an attachment order. So we need to let the court or creditor know. And it also gives us our next steps for the leaver. So we'll need to ensure we update records to record the tax and NI for that final payment, and then process the leaver details before we do our full payment submission. So that's a task that we'll be completing later on in the pay run. So a couple more employees just to show you. Employee 4 was the one who is starting her maternity leave this month. And because we entered the absence details, if I click the summary tab, you can see the statutory maternity pay has been calculated automatically. So again, we need to make an adjustment to the employee's usual salary. So if we want to pay them salary for the days they've worked, we would do a manual adjustment similar to what we did for the leaver. If we want to make up to their full pay, so maybe you provide company maternity pay, you want to give them their usual wage for some of their maternity leave, you can actually use this make up basic option. So you would simply enter the full amount of salary you want them to receive, which I've already got entered here. And then on the summary tab, if you click Make Up Basic, you can then click Yes to adjust the basic. And you can see here the employee is ending up with their usual salary, but it's made up of maternity pay and a reduced salary amount. Again, we cover that in more detail in our maternity pay and paternity pay webinars. So we're just going to run through and save the default payments for the rest of the employees to save a bit of time here. Most of them are getting fixed salaries, but you can see I have got some hourly paid employees. So we'd maybe look at their timesheets, see how many hours we need to pay them for this month. And then the final employee is our new starter. And again, if they haven't worked for the full period, you'll need to do an adjustment to their salary. And in this case, I know that this employee is working 18 days out of 23 in May. So that is how I'm going to calculate the salary. And because they're a new starter, if you've got our pensions module, you'll be doing a pension assessment to determine if they need to go into the pension scheme. If you don't use the pensions module, what you may need to do is assign the pension scheme at this point. And I've got another tip to share with you. If you are in the middle of a payroll and you need to get into the employee record to make any changes or to look up any information, you don't have to close out of enter payments and lose where you were up to. What you can do is you can just click this employee icon. That then takes us into the employee record. In this case, I might go onto the pensions. I might add on the pension scheme for this particular employee, starting from their start date. Just check I'm happy with the percentages. And then that will return me back to the pay run where I was. We can see now that we now have a pension contribution. So that's all the payments entered. And you can see in the employee list that the last calculated column indicates that we've calculated pay for the 31st of May. I just want to quickly show you an alternative way of entering hours worked for those employees that perhaps submit timesheets. So there is a timesheet entry option, which you can see here in the process map and in the payroll tasks. So you could use this to quickly enter hours worked. So we've got here our basic and overtime payments. If I was walking through putting the overtime in, I could do it as a batch like this. That might save you a little bit of time. So an alternative way of entering hours using the timesheet entry option. So let's just recap where we're up to. So we started by setting our process date to the date the employees receive their pay. We've just been through the enter payment screen, but if required, you could reset payments first. You could use timesheet entry as a quick way to enter hours worked. And if you have our pensions module, you would then run a pension assessment. And a reminder of the enter payment screen, you navigate between the different tabs to see the various pay elements, payments and deductions. You'll be entering hours and or rate values for each of the different payments. You'll see a simple gross to net towards the bottom of the screen, showing the PAYE and NIC deductions. If you're happy with everything, you click Save Next to move on to the next employee. And my top tip for this one, if you need to jump into an employee record without losing your place in Enter Payments, use that employee link at the top of the Enter Payments screen. So we are now halfway through the webinar and halfway through our payroll process. It is now time to produce our payslips and reports. So payslips are a legal requirement. They must be given to employees on or before their pay date. And with payroll, you have 3 different ways of producing your payslips. So you can set up online payslips and upload them to Sage HR online services. You can email payslips as an attachment, which can be password protected. You can do that from Microsoft Outlook or from webmail accounts if you enter webmail settings. Or you can do it traditionally and you can print payslips either onto plain paper or onto payslip stationery. So we used to provide stationery, but we no longer sell that, and it is still available from third-party sellers. But if you are printing onto plain paper, I do have a tip for the payslips, which I will share in the demo. Now, you should also produce reports for your own records. So we would suggest running Payment Summary Part 1 and 2 as a minimum. And I'll also show you in the demo a way that you can create a report selection, which will bundle together a number of reports, enabling you to create a single report, a single PDF document as a reports pack. So let's take a look at that now. Bring the slides down and we will return to our payroll process. We've still got everyone that we're paying highlighted. And the next step that we're going to go into is our pre-update reports. So it's just here within the tasks and here within the process map. Now, the first thing you'll see are any reports that you've added to your favorites. So I've got a payslip, the Payment Summary Part 1 and 2. And there are a few different formats for payslips. So you've got the email payslips, if you've set that up and you want to email it as an attachment, or if you're printing, there's the laser payslips. And there are a few different formats that you can sort of experiment with and choose your personal preference. Or if you are printing onto stationery, have a look at the description and find the description that matches what your stationery says. Now, if you're doing it online, it's a slightly different process, which I'll show you shortly. But for those of you printing, you can generate a preview by either double clicking the report or selecting it and clicking preview. Now, because I have set up some of my employees to receive online payslips, it's asking me if I want to include them in the printed version. And for this demo, I'm going to click yes, because I want you to see all of the payslips. You'll see the report preview is now on screen, which I will just expand a little bit for you. And you can see the information around the payments and deductions for the current period. And it will always include the employer pension somewhere on the payslip. Got all the year-to-date values. Down here is the employee's net pay. So you can see this on the preview, the various pay elements that we saw when we ran through and entered the payments. Now, if I was to print this, the only things that would print would be the words and the numbers. So this green background is a template, so it won't print out. It's designed to replicate what the stationery would look like. Now, if you're going to be printing onto plain paper and you want to include that template, here's a quick tip for you. If you export the report as a PDF, that will include the background template, and then you can print that PDF rather than printing directly from Sage, and then you'll get the full color version as you're seeing on screen. So if I click export, just to show you what I mean, I'm going to stick this on my desktop so it's easy to find. I will call it May Payslips. And then if I just close out of the preview, you can see then we have a file with all the background. And if we print from here, it will actually print exactly what we see on screen. So a quick tip for you, if you are printing payslips onto plain paper. So back into the reports, I've also got some payment summary reports added to my favorites. So these are found in the summary folder. They're listed alphabetically, so you've got landscape or portrait versions. And to add a report to your favorites, simply click the star next to the report name. You'll see that then gets added. And to give you a quick preview of these reports, part 1 gives you a breakdown of gross to net for each employee. So it calls out PAYE, national insurance, pension contributions, detail on statutory payments, right down to the net pay figure. So this is the amount that will go out of our bank when we come to pay the wages. And part 2 gives a bit more detail on the employer side of things. So this one will give you employer's NI, employer's pension contribution, and also a record of tax codes, NI categories being used as well. So as a minimum, we would recommend printing payslip and payment summary reports. Now, what you might want to do is bundle them all together as a report selection. And we are doing a separate webinar on report selections in the coming weeks. So do get yourself signed up if you want to learn more on how to create these. But essentially, it allows you to choose which reports you want to run together. And here's one I created earlier. And if I preview this report selection, you'll see that the preview is split into tabs. So I've got a set of payslips, got payment summary part 1 and 2, and I've also bundled in a pensions current report. And the good thing about this is if I export the report, but I do it by clicking on this little drop-down arrow, I can export it all as a single document. I'm going to call this one May Payroll Reports. And once it's exported them, this is my reports pack. So I've got 8 pages on this one. Copy of the pay slips, both of the payment summaries, and also that pensions report. So a great way of keeping everything in one place. So you've seen there some of the reports that you can print. It's a whole range of reports as well to explore there. But the other thing I want to show you is the online pay slips. So I've already set it up for this demo. So I'm going to show you how simple it is to create online pay slips once it's set up. And we'll give you a quick look at what they look like in the online portal. So you'll actually see that there's a separate option to upload pay slips, both in the process map and the payroll tasks. If I click onto that, it's then going to display the employees that I've set up for this option. And it then gives me the option of either publishing them on a date in the future. So I could publish them a couple of days before pay date or on pay date itself. Or the other option is to publish them immediately. And once they are published, either on that date in the future or immediately, the employees get an email notification and they can then sign in to an online portal or a mobile app and they can view their pay slip that way. So I'm just going to go ahead and publish those pay slips. It should just take a few seconds. And these ones have been successfully set to publish on the date specified. And if I just show you my online portal, which I already have open here, I can go to the company payslips area. What you should see is I have a set of payslips that are now pending, ready to be published on the 29th. I can view the details if I want to, like so. And if you want to see what an employee would see, you can actually go into the employee's individual profile. You can view their payslips and P60s. So these are the ones that are published. Remember, May is pending. And this is the exact view that the employee would get of their own payslip. So if you get payslip queries, even if you're not in front of payroll, if you've got a web browser open, you can sign into Sage HR as an admin. You can view the payslip that your employee's looking at from their profile. So that is our pre-update reports. And again, follow these links for more information on any of the features you've seen here, like the report selections. And it moves us on to our 4th task, which is to update the records. So this confirms the payroll. It creates a historical entry and it makes that period read-only. So you won't be able to make any changes unless you restore a backup or rollback. Once you've updated records, you could then post the nominal link to accounts. We recently ran a webinar on that if you want to find out more. And you'd run the leaver wizard to produce a P45 for anyone leaving. So let's just rejoin the demo and complete those steps. We'll move HR down. We've checked all of those reports then. We're happy with the figures. So we're happy to update records. And that is the next step that we will complete. So make sure you've got the same employees highlighted. I haven't changed any selections here. So I'm going to click Update Records. There is then a reminder that if you need to produce pre-update reports, you must do so before you update. So I'm going to confirm I've done that. Yes, I want to continue. And then it does give you an option to take a manual backup of your data. Now, I'd strongly recommend that you do this and keep it in a location that you'll be able to access if anything happened to the PC that you're working on. And you can run through the backup wizard like so, just following the backup steps and then browsing to the location that you want to save your backup. So I could call this one May pre-update backup. And I then know that I've got a point I can come back to if I need to, either to correct a mistake or if something happens to the PC I'm working on, and I can then continue to update the records. So it confirms here that I have 10 monthly employees selected, shows me the employee names. When I click onto finish, it confirms that the employees have been updated, and it reminds me to use the lever wizard and then complete a full payment submission. And what you can now see, if you scan down your employee list, is that the last updated date displays my May pay date. And if I did try to go back into enter payments for that date, it's not going to let me because that is now historical. We take a look in the employee record on the history tab. We do now have an entry for the 31st of May. Now, what we need to do next, because we had someone who left, is to process our lever. It's important you do this before you do your submission to HMRC, because you need to include the leaving details in that FPS. So when it comes to levers, the first thing to do is to make sure that you select the employee leaving and only the employee leaving, because you don't want to run this for everyone on your payroll. And then you can either use the process levers option from the process map, or you can go to your employee tasks where we set up that new employee, and you can choose the lever option from here. Now in the lever wizard, it is just a case of recording the leaving date, which for this employee was the 19th of May. And then to produce the P45, open this drop-down list and choose P45 plain paper. And then we can either print it directly or we can preview it, which will give us some of the other output options. So this is the P45 for the lever. They would give, or they keep this copy. They would give part 2 to the new employer, and they would use this information to set up the employment record. They would also hand in part 3 to the new employer to keep on their records. So this one does just go onto plain paper. You don't need to export it first. It's got all the background and that will print out. You print that out, give it to your employee. Other options might be to export, or there's an email output if you want to attach it to an email. And then to complete the lever wizard, click onto finish. Just a reminder about that court attachment. And we can see there that the current status now reads lever. Now, what some people like to do is to hide levers from their employee list. So it only shows your active employees in the list. And if you wanted to do that, another tip for you, click onto criteria here at the top and select the box to exclude current year levers. You can see there that has removed the employee from the list. If you ever need to bring them back or you prefer to have them in view anyway, you can always clear that box and that brings them back. So we have updated the records. We have ran the lever wizard. Our last step in the pay run is to submit our payroll to HMRC. So returning to my payroll tasks and switching that process map back on. Now at the kind of finishing straight to our payroll process, we are now going to submit our full payment submission. So this is something you need to send on or before pay date. It's also a task in the payroll tasks list here. Just going to select my employees again and go into full payment submission. And because we place someone on hold this period and we're processing the pay frequency where they are usually paid, we now need to include them in this FPS, which will then notify HMRC that they are irregularly paid. Now, you only have to do this on the first submission after you put them on hold. And if they return to work for you again, you take them off hold, they get included in the normal FPS. And it's just a way of notifying HMRC that although they're not working, they are still employed by you. So we are actually going to include the employee on hold in this submission. Ignore the warning. This is just because I'm in a classroom, so you won't see this. And then it takes us through the full payment submission wizard. So from here, we would click continue, and it will display your gateway registration and company details. I'd click on to submit, and you can see here the leaving details, the starter details, tax period and liability figures are all included in the submission. And for that employee on hold, all it's submitting here is the irregularly paid flag, just informing HMRC of their current status. And this total liability represents the amount of tax, national insurance and student loan that we would be due to pay over based on this particular pay run. So I'm going to click submit, and you'll see a progress bar move across the screen. And once the submission is successful, you'll see this confirmation message. We can then close out of that screen and note that the last FPS date for all of these employees now matches the last updated date, confirming that we've included them in a submission for that pay date. So that is pretty much the pay run complete. Let's just recap where we got up to. So we've updated the records and we then ran the lever wizard. It is really important that you process your levers in the right sequence. So update records first so that their final pay is recorded in their history. Run the lever wizard to record the leaving date, do your full payment submission to submit that information. If in doubt, just follow the process map. And then final step was submit to HMRC. So it includes all the starter and lever information, employee details and taxable pay, student loan, tax and NI deductions, and that needs to be sent on or before the employee's pay date. So that takes us on to the final part of the webinar, and we just have a couple of month-end tasks to tick off the list. So here are your month-end checklist. We're going to run a P32 report, which will break down the payment that we need to make to HMRC. If required, we will then submit an EPS, an employer payment summary. Now this is used to inform HMRC about any items that weren't included on the FPS, such as statutory pay you've recovered. And then the third step, which I can't show you, but something you must do, is make your payment of tax and national insurance to HMRC by the deadline. So that's the 22nd of the following month if you pay electronically, or the 19th of the month if you pay by check. Now, when we're talking about month end in payroll, we are actually referring to tax months. So a tax calendar is slightly different to a traditional calendar, as the tax month starts on the 6th day of the month and it finishes on the 5th day of the following month. So it's not particularly a problem if you pay monthly, because you'll only have one pay date per month. Once you've completed that, you can move on to month end. But if you pay weekly, fortnightly or 4-weekly, you do need to be sure that you've completed all pay dates within the tax month before you run these month-end tasks. So all of the pay dates that land on or before the 5th day of the following calendar month. If you'd like to download a handy tax calendar, there is one available in our help centre. So that P32 report, as I just mentioned, is a breakdown of the payment you need to make to HMRC each month. So it'll show you the total income tax, student postgraduate loan deductions, and gross national insurance. That's all the information that we submitted on our FPS. But it will then show you any adjustments, such as employment allowance that you're claiming, statutory payments you've recovered, or apprenticeship levy payments that you need to make. And once that's all factored in, at the bottom of the report, you see the amount you need to pay to HMRC. So those other items, because they're not included in the FPS, may require an EPS to be sent. With employment allowance, you send an EPS at the start of the tax year, and that covers you for the rest of that year. But if you do have statutory payments recovered or apprenticeship levy payments to make, you will need to do an EPS at the end of each month. So let's take a look at this in the demo. So first of all, I'll just confirm that I've completed my pay run for tax month 2. So I pay monthly, I only have one pay date. My last updated and last FPS date both confirm 31st of May. So to produce the P32 report, I could go through the payroll links, and you'll find a quick link to the P32 report from here. Or you can go into the main reports option at the top, select the period end folder, and it's this one here, Form P32, Employer Payment Record. So a good one to add to your favorites. I'm now going to run this for month 2, which is the May tax month. Starts the 6th of May, ends the 5th of June. And if I just make that a little bit bigger for you, you can see it's got my tax, national insurance, some employment allowance that I've recovered, statutory payments recovered, and then the amount due, just under £2,500. So obviously our FPS was showing that our liability was in the 4,000s, but because of these reductions, we will need to send an EPS to HMRC. Now, I've already done the EPS for the employment allowance. We don't need to worry about that. It's because we've recovered statutory pay that we need to do the EPS at the end of the month. So we might export this for our records or print a copy. And each time you run the P32, if you check your company settings and look on the HMRC Payments tab, actually record some of the key information. So the amount due this month, what we should be paying. And because we need to send an EPS, I'm just going to go to our e-submissions tasks. And I'm just going to run through the employer payment summary wizard. So usually you would do this towards the end of a tax month. So it needs to be submitted after the 19th, but before the 19th of the following month. So I'm a little bit early for this demo, but I just want to show you the steps. I'm going to choose the option I'm adjusting my payment because I've recovered a statutory payment. I'm going to confirm the tax month is correct. It then shows me the amounts recovered, and this is a year-to-date value. So when I do this next month, I'll be submitting the year-to-date values for what I've recovered. CIS deduction suffered can be entered manually if you're in the construction industry scheme and you need to reclaim that. And then for larger employers, apprenticeship levy value payments will appear here. So that completes the wizard and takes us into the submission. And we then send this through, which enables HMRC to deduct the amounts that we're reclaiming from our monthly bill, and your online account should then match up with what it says you owe in Sage Payroll. So that has now been sent. If you ever want to view the details of what you've sent previously, always check your e-submissions log. And you can look at the details of an EPS. So it shows you the values that were included. And for FPSs, if you want to see the full information in your FPS, you can also go into an FPS viewer. It gives you some information on here as well. So that's our month end done. We ran the P32, and because we recovered a statutory payment, we have submitted our EPS. And that then actually brings us to the end of the presentation. So we've got about 4 minutes left. So if you have any final burning questions, do get them submitted through now, and we will do our best to answer those for you. But I want to quickly run through where you can find further support to help yourself with all things payroll. So first thing to call out is our online help centre, which you can access at sage.co.uk/help. You'll find a number of curated support guides on the main payroll topics. There's also a knowledge base you can search. There is a webinars link that you'll find towards the top of the page where you can sign up to other webinars, and also look out for our videos and contact options for the support team should you need to get in touch. So that's your one-stop shop for your payroll support. You can also get access to Sage University free of charge as a Sage member at sageu.com. You simply need to create your profile the first time you use it, and then you can access our payroll e-learning courses to complete at your own pace. You can do the online certification. You and also dip in and out of our bite-sized learning courses that we continuously update. So Sage University at sageu.com. So we are getting towards the end of the session now. So I just want to say a massive thank you to everyone that's attended today. I do hope you found the session useful. We are going to stick around a few more minutes to make sure we can answer as many questions as possible. And if you haven't already done so, I would encourage you to download our handouts. It contains a number of useful links to some of those features that we just touched upon in the webinar today. We've tried to get through quite a lot, share a lot of hints and tips with you. You will also be invited to take a survey as you leave the webinar today, and would really appreciate any feedback that you might have on the session today. It does help us to plan future webinar topics and also make improvements to make sure that these sessions are hitting the mark for you guys. So please do complete the survey when it pops up. There's also a link to that in your follow-up email that we'll be sending you in about an hour's time. So I'm just going to go on mute for a few moments while I help out with the questions. So I will be back to say goodbye before we close down the webinar. Hello again, everyone, and thank you for sending those questions through. It looks like we have sent a response to them all. So hopefully those answers have been helpful. As you can see, we are now at the top of the hour, so we have unfortunately run out of time for this session. But never fear, we are running these webinars each week. We've got different topics. We run this particular session once a month. So if you have colleagues that might benefit from it, do get them signed up. You can find all of the upcoming sessions online at sage.co.uk/webinars, and we'll include that link in your follow-up email as well. So for now, we're going to say goodbye, but thanks once again for joining us. I hope you enjoyed the session, and I look forward to perhaps seeing you on some of our other webinars in the future. Goodbye for now.